Welcome everyone to Macro Social Work Stories. Today we have Isabel Lee, who's going to school us on issues that are current right now with Asian Americans and the struggle we have going on, and it's real. So Isabel, can you please introduce yourself and let us know what you're doing in your doctoral program?
Sure. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for having me this podcast. I feel very, very honored, and then I was so thrilled. I could not sleep last night, actually. My first time ever in the podcast. So, but yeah.
And video.
Yeah. So going back to the point, I'm a third-year doctoral student at the Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research at Bryn Mawr College, but I'm taking it as a part-time and as a full-time worker, I'm working as an account manager at PA Health and Wellness in Pennsylvania. I am a person of color, immigrant, cisgender woman, a mother of 3 children who has a professional background in business, translation and interpreting, and social work. My career path in social work informed by all these dimensions of my identity and my work with Asians. In 2014, I started working with Asian Americans and their descendants who have no health insurance. I helped them to enroll the affordable health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. And then I observed there's some unique disparities in the access to and use of health and social services that impacted Asian immigrants with especially limited English proficiency. So attention to these disparities impacting the Asian American and even the Pacific Islander community, that is really critical because this Asian American and Pacific Islanders, according to the last 2010 census result, is about 5.6% of the national census.
What caught your eye? Sorry, Isabel, what caught your eye? You said you noticed. What stood out? Why did it grab your attention?
Because the funny thing is that when I got first kind of volunteered and worked and got hired as a bilingual navigator under that time that was my title, and it was kind of funny that my quantifiable goal was to meet about 100 people. I thought I was like, wow, 100 a year, can I assist them? I was like, I could not imagine it. But believe it or not, within 2 months, I just reached 100. And by the end of the year, that contract year, I served about 300 families, so which means about 500 individuals in total. So the demands were just overwhelming for me. Like, hey, what is going on? Why the people are so coming to me? I mean, I thought, and then because I just came to the United States a couple of years back, and it was really surprising for me. So, I wanted to help them, but I want to do it right. So, when I pursued my master's in the translation and interpreting, it was kind of funny that anybody who's a bilingual, they think, oh, you can be an interpreter, you can be a translator. But I found out that there is some theoretical background and there is a professional solidarity and the ethics that is all combined as a profession. So, why not? I mean, social work. I'm sorry, I was not really into the social work field back then. Yeah. So I did digging into what is social work? What do we do? How can I do my job, correctly and then more purposefully? So I just went into the master's program, and then it was one of the best decisions I have ever made in the U.S. Not only getting the higher education, but also aligning with my purpose and aligning with my career. It was just, it just happened.
I like it. We never know what really catches our attention, and it's often what we're not looking for. So, it doesn't matter if you were into social work or not at the time, and you follow the path as it opens, right? So that's wonderful. All right, tell us more. I see Steve, I think, has a question or a comment.
Well, no, I just no, it's wonderful. Your point about how it just sort of happened, Isabel, is really important, but then the purpose becomes so much more powerful. One of the things that's become clear in the last, I mean, it's always been clear, but if people were willing to look, is there's always been an assumption that Asian Americans actually didn't have the problems that other racial groups had in this country. And I think that's one of the myths that's exploded now. That would be important for you to talk about. I imagine in that work you were doing in translation that you began to see the reality of that inequity. Was that the case where you began to see those kinds of inequities quite present?
Yeah, so thanks for asking and bringing up that good point. So the kind of myth that the Asians are the model minorities, I think it's very cliche and typical, but I'm not quite sure actually we are in that model minority. And then I'm just wondering where that the model minority, that term come from, because I even ask like peer social worker kind of practitioners and researchers, why the model minority? What is the difference between the Asian population and other marginalized groups? And the my coworker made a really great point that it's a complementary. It's a complementary for the Asian American population. But on the other hand, I'm just wondering that whether that misconception divide Asian American with other marginalized population. Like, hey, look at the Asian American, which is like only a partial of highly successful like kind of groups. And then it doesn't represent all the Asian groups, because some Asian groups have huge poverty level. And then the limited English proficiency is like in New York for Korean older adults, Chinese older adults, they're like more than 90%. So it does not make sense that, model minority does not speak English. That does not make sense. On the other hand, and the model minority is just, being poor, is just gives us some kind of a frame that they cannot get out of the frame. And then also it implies that the model minority kind of gives a sense that you are okay until you reach this certain level, but beyond that we don't want you to be that model. So like it's comparison between marginalized population. So that kind of sense, model minority and all the other conception gives us some wrong direction about portraying ourselves, and we just be quiet and we do the work. But that is not so true. So under the pandemic, we've seen that our voice is getting larger and bigger because of such a huge issue like anti-Asian crimes and anti-Asian violence. It's just so sad that I have to see, but in a way that I have seen as an immigrant who has been in the States only for a little older than 10 years, I've seen the racism. I've experienced one, but I don't share it because, what is good on that? But I don't think it does not help anybody. Now is kind of crucial time for Asian Americans to be united, which is actually happening, I think, in the throughout the Asian American history, and then the raise awareness that we are part of this society, we are part of this social fabrics. So, on the other hand, the pandemic has impacted us physically, mentally so hard. So it's sad that it's happening, but in other words, I'm kind of have some hopes that this movement, this kind of Asian American uniteness, it can go further ahead, and the who knows what the future is ahead of us. So we'll see. Did I answer your question correctly, Professor Steve?
Oh, it's wonderful. You raised a lot of really important issues that I'm just thinking about that are so really important.
Well, and you both raised something to me because I was thinking model minority before you said the term, because we used to say something in grad school, and then you said model minority, and I thought, oh, right. And I remembered a classroom discussion when you were asking, where did that term even come from? And I remember asking that in class. But the short answer was model minorities arrived by airplane.
Oh,
And it started an entire, this is my vague recollection, but I remember the whole conversation around it being the filter. It's a financial filter, which raised the level of this particular minority. And I think we were discussing Asian as the model minority, but in a generic way, and we were much more generic back then, 20 years ago. So, but it was the quick answer was they arrived by plane.
So Dr. Christie, like listening to you, that it just gives me another kind of point that how that sometimes, mainstream sees Asian American in a wrong way, because in the immigration purposes, in the lens of immigration, that there are push factor and pull factor. And someone like me, even though, I was born and raised in the South Korea, and then I came here in my 30s. And it was kind of for me to come here on my own. It was my own choice. It was not like, coming here. So I had a purpose. I had I wanted to come to the States and then do more work, do valuable work, and give more opportunity to my children. That was kind of, pull factor. And so the purpose of other minority groups, that is pre-distinct. So comparing that kind of, focusing on that part is this, just naming Asian American as a model minority can give us a so much wrong conception that there was a purpose when we first came here. It was unlike African American. So it was just totally different approach that mainstream has to take into consideration, but which I don't think it was there back then, because it was 20 years ago, and then now still we are facing the same kind of a stereotyping of the Asian Americans. So I'm sorry that but it was really interesting to hear that about the how that term comes from. I had no idea. Really.
Well, that was at USC, and that was like in 2000. So I was just having these little snippets come up, and I remember after that we were talking about those who come from India and the stereotypes attached to it. So it did lead into the stereotype conversation of what it means to be lumped into much larger groups that cover a very large geographical area. We're not talking about just, and I think but it's led to a lot of the leadership continuing to lump it in because everybody's since aged and didn't really advance any of their ideas. And I think they're trying really hard at the moment to catch up.
Yeah.
But a lot of support is needed. So I'm really glad that you're here. What do you think is the most important thing to separate out for those who are especially teaching in social work right now when it comes to being in the larger Asian American community? How do we discuss making this more personal?
Yeah.
You said South Korea. So how is that? How do we make sure we're differentiating that between you've arrived from Japan and why we can't just lump it all into the same? And then how, because you said bringing everyone together as well. And so why is it important to be clear on not lumping everybody into the same place? And we do that a lot with, all the Latin community, we tend to do that as well. So when is it helpful and when is it harmful, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to bring us together or separate?
So one of the things that I'm hearing from you, Dr. Christie, is what would we can achieve as a kind of social work profession to kind of promote Asian Americans, better kind of health and social services in terms of social justice, and then how can it align to the social work education? So which I've been thinking really hard, because I want to see someone like me. I want to see more people like, who's bilingual, even though English is not my first language, who can at least communicate and then deliver the message to the mainstream and then deliver back to the my target population where we are heading. Unfortunately, it's really rare to see any bilingual Asian social workers in the my region. I'm not so sure about the West Coast, but where I'm in the Philadelphia, the greater Philadelphia area, and then it's like I can even pinpoint who has who is in a social workers in this area. So it's interesting to see that why that we are not seeing so many of just like me, and that it kind of brings me, and that under this pandemic we have witnessed that the how much that the social environment and then the political kind of viewing political views on Asian American as a kind of victims of the racial discrimination, and then calling us like pandemic as a Chinese flu, Kung Fu flu,
Right.
That is very, very inappropriate, I guess. And then within the even Asian community, hey, that's for like East Asian, and then Asian is like divided into South Asian and then Pacific Islanders, but it's just impacting overall like all this Asian American Pacific Islander population. So promoting these social workers within the with bilingual capacity is really matters. So NASW published the social worker statistics, like what are their demographics, what are the BSW, MSW, DSW, PhD, the kind of division, and then we are seeing that social work profession is growing over the time. But however, Asian social workers, regardless of their bilingual capacity, is declining actually. It's less than, it's close to 3% of the whole social work population. So this is kind of sad for me to, see. And then I try to connect with other, social worker students in my school, but it's just a couple of them. And then sometimes our agenda is so different, so it's hard to be united in some ways. But no matter what, when we face this pandemic, we've seen the Asian hate crimes. We've seen that there's a huge need mental and behavior support for the Asian population, and we need some systemic changes to promote the Asian social workers and some advocacy for these population. We've seen the needs there. So for this opportunity, I hope that we can have some more support from the social work education, leaders, someone like you, Professor Steve, Professor Christy, and Professor Gary, like someone like you just support it. And then the division between the micro, macro, it doesn't even come to us. It doesn't even come to Asian population because we are so little in number. So just promoting just the social workers, that is kind of what I wish to see in the throughout my career and after my graduation and in my career path afterwards.
So how do we reach you? It's I know throughout, and I've been in I've been West Coast through all my career, and I've worked in various Asian communities here. Especially in LA, we have all of our small, we have our towns within, and my kids' school, actually, they have a very large Korean community at our school. So they celebrate all the Korean holidays at our school, which is unusual, right? But they're learning that way, because I'm thinking about my kids. They learn that way. But how do we teach others? And I know it can be more difficult if we don't feel, and I mean we as a social work community in general, don't feel as though there's a question to be asked, and that happens a lot in the classroom. So we're not reaching out either. We assume that the students understand, or the students know what's going on, or know the questions to ask, and they don't. And so if they aren't asking, how do we reach them? how do we say this? We don't want this to happen. There's a divide here. So even if they're not looking to have the conversation because it might be uncomfortable or difficult, how do we bring it to them?
Just candidacy. I think that matters. Like pure like attention. Like that show that we care, because we know that there are good people. There are some people who, who might be discriminating Asian American in general, not only the Korean American, Chinese American,
Yeah.
but in general, like, the pure attention that when it happens, that it happens in a way, and then do not like, make it a just deliver the fact that it's not about the for Atlanta shooting, for example, like Atlanta shooting, that mass media like try to portray it as kind of some conflict between the sex addict and massage parlor worker, and it really hurt me because on the flip side of it, Asian American or Asian, I'm not so sure about their, how they come here, their linguistic capacity. I have no idea. But in the long run, they are the most vulnerable population. And the just targeting them is really sad. I've been like even asking myself, can it be done in hand and stone? Like, where that there's totally different, workers and the target, client come and go. It would not be happen there because the murderer thought that he could get away with that. That was as simple as that, and the just mass media just talking about Chinese flu, Kung Fu flu. It is not acceptable because we don't even know. So looking back in the Spanish flu, we all know now that the actually it was originated among the U.S. military and in the Kansas. And then, during their shipment to the Europe, it got spread over all the globe. But nobody calls it U.S. flu. Nobody calls it U.S. military flu, even though it was, proved that so. Because, and then, the image that U.S. has as a kind of a symbolism of a liberalism, and then, all the free land kind of, that the symbols that the U.S. has been carrying over the past 100 years might have been impacted if we call it just U.S. flu, because it just kills so many people globally. And so what we can see is that looking back to history and then just asking them, because all the marginalized population has gone through these steps. It could be a growing pain. And then this kind of social work discussion that what I'm just trying to convey, that we need to promote this bilingual workforce, bilingual social workers. It might be a talk, maybe has been, the topic 60, 50 years ago among the other, social work professionals, just recruiting African American social workers. So history repeats. So during this pandemic, I get to learn more about the Spanish flu, and then I get to see that the social work profession got really bolstered, and they got the status as a professional after the huge need among the medical social workers right after the Spanish flu. So I'm hoping that I can see more macro social workers, that we've seen that virus does not discriminate, but all the other factors. So socioeconomic factors, cultural factors, and the housing, education, all those factors, impact the marginal population. So we need to make.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking on a socioeconomic factor. That's one when we talk about model minority, at least in the past. That was where it split among other minorities.
Yes.
In that they are perceived to have more money, or they come here because they have a higher level of education, etc. But I think that those shootings raised a few questions that a few places addressed, and I think in the classroom we can definitely talk about it more, because I personally became curious. Who were they? How did they come here? How did they, and I mean come here to this job? This is working class that most are not thinking about in the U.S. If you live in a large urban area, and you're aware that I live in Los Angeles, and they're everywhere, in nail salons. We don't think about the working class as being part of the Asian American community unless you live local to it, I don't think. And so I think just even curiosity as far as who they were. And I saw that there were a few campaigns on Twitter and a couple others naming the workers and who they are and who their families were. And that didn't get enough attention, in my opinion, because I think just knowing who they are and why they're here, or how they came here in the first place, would make a difference and how much they contribute. So, and regardless of where they're from, but just ignorance tends to breed contempt or fear. And so just getting to know who the workers were and who the workers continue to be in our urban areas might make a difference, because we attach a real person and a real story and the families behind, someone who goes through so much trouble just to get here. And a lot of this attached to the American dream culture and all of that, which may or may not be real, but that's a topic for another day, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really glad you're here. The 5%'s always stuck with me. It's a large enough number that it shouldn't be such a quiet voice. And it tends to be, and I don't know how much of that also is part of culture and respect, but I'm glad you're here so we can hear your voice, and you're speaking for so many that don't get the opportunity to. And I hope that part of what you're doing too, especially you said you have 3 kids,
yes,
and you're leading by example and empowering others to speak up as well. So thank you for doing that while you're here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your comment on the being a mom and then just leading the what I have gone through. Anybody can experience some hardship in their lives, but I hope my kids can have better opportunity and feel like, they are actually belonging in this country, which we have chosen to live and then chosen to make difference, based on the spirit of America. So I'm really glad to be invited and have a chance to, talk about my thoughts, Professor.
Dr. Jones.
Yes, thank you. We have learned that America, your story of immigration is quite diverse, and because you have looked at history, some things we've been told. America is a number of conflicts. We give this perception of land of liberty for some, and we try to box certain groups in to divide us rather than see what we have in common. But I'm thankful for your voice. One question I had to ask was, as you shared your story, you talked about racism and how initially you may have not been maybe hesitant to share your story. The pandemic, what other events may have encouraged individuals to share their story? What can we do as social workers for people to share their story?
You mean social worker perspective or the as an Asian group in general?
We'll do it Asian, and then we can look at it from social work perspective.
So Asian American they are like, when they first came here, it's a different, like I said earlier, pull factor that we're like, learn to be quiet, do your job and just do your business and then do whatever you need to do. And then that's it. So that's kind of a mentality that we've been keeping from the native country to this, even the host country. So that kind of brings up that, it's not worth it. We have to fight our lives to make a place as a financially, and the financial security could be the first goal. So we haven't gotten to think a lot about these incidents, these racism happening to us. We just take it, let it go, take it, let it go. But at a certain point, this pandemic, which has been heightened, the awareness of that, Asian are the carrier of the virus. They are the source of all this evil. This really could not take it anymore, because we think that Asian think that in general that we are making difference, we are making contribution to this country as a one citizen, resident, as immigrant. But when we see that, we're not being heard, we're like, you guys are others, those kind of othernization, that really hurt people. So that kind of brings us that think about now is maybe the time that we really have to raise our voice and then make it known. So where I work in the greater Philadelphia area, actually some Asian community-based nonprofit organizations did some great work for the other minority groups, such as mask making campaign, and then donated their mask to the other marginalized population, because there are a lot of Korean business owners who are in the laundry business. So while that it was shut off, they did was like, why don't we make closed mask when there's a huge lack of masks, not like here, but back in about a year ago, March, April, we've seen that, where's mask, we've been looking for it. So they started that kind of purposeful work, because to show that we are part of this America. Listen to us. We're not just here for vain. We are not like being here for financial stability. We're just here to make difference, just like you do. And then it was really great work. So that kind of, pandemic fueled the situation, just bring the people together. And then social workers, as kind of in the eyes of a social workers, I see the huge needs after post-pandemic, that the mental health issue is going to be, everywhere. It has not been identified yet, because this is rare. Like pandemic has been 100 years ago, so we don't have record about what happened, how it. But I can definitely see that, we're going to see that there's a huge need about the mental and health issues among the young people who have seen that their grandpa got attacked, and then, just discriminated. I mean, even though all those, sacrifices they have made, like, they are born that, like, you have to do a good job as American citizen, as an American people, as an immigrant, you have to be a model, not the model, but, yeah, but, you have to do a good job, but it's not that way. So what I'm worrying is that there's going to be need, but we are not going to meet the needs in the clinical part. And we've seen that there is community engagement, community empowerment, and community advocacy. Those are the core of the macro social work. I'm like 2 or 3 macro social work Asian, macro social works I've seen throughout my social work, educational duration. So it's not that long. I mean, just 5-6 years so far. But yeah, that just me and other person is it does not end up like, so that's the kind of
cultural competence that just popped up in my head too. It's one of our social work buzzwords. It's almost like one of our corporate things. So yes, it's important, but how do we cover it? And why does it matter here? Even when you're saying pandemic, it's been 100 years, we don't even have the records for it. How do we practice cultural competence, on a macro level, on a meso, on a micro level, in order to address these issues? You're right. It's going to be hard to identify, across the board in the U.S., and we don't have the number of providers or the infrastructure even to handle it. But even if we could, how are we culturally competent enough to reach those who need it and aren't going to seek it?
Thank you so much for bringing that question, Dr. Christie, because that actually Office of Minority Health under the federal government, they have a culturally and linguistically appropriate services kind of guidelines and national standards, which has like 15 lined up standards, like, what are the cultural competency, what are the linguistic competency, and how it can be implemented in the health and social service sector, which I find it is not implemented that well. So that's why about a couple of years ago, 2018, they actually published how to evaluate the standard of the culturally and linguistically appropriate services. If it were implemented so well, why there's a need for the evaluation toolkit? So just publishing that toolkit makes it like kind of make me laugh. Like, it's just obvious it's not working. So we have to do better job. So thank you for bringing up about the cultural competency, but we really need some kind of natural, national standard, what it means, a cultural competency, and how we can actually implement it in the most effectively among the diverse population, because LEP is going to be only growing. I'm not talking about Asian LEP. I'm talking about Latino. I'm talking about Eastern European people with a English, whose first language is not English. But, so it's just cultural competency. We'll have to dig into it. And then I feel just so sorry for that. It's just, sometimes it makes me like kind of, what are you trying to convey? Is it like, is it like surface knowledge? Like, we all know that it has to be culturally competent, and it is one of the section under the Code of Ethics from the National Social Work Association. There's a section at the end of the cultural competency, but are we really getting it? I mean, that's some other topic that we can explore maybe, some other time. But yeah, but thanks for bringing that up. I'm sorry, I'm just maybe some vocal about the CLAS. Sorry about that.
Oh, I'm really glad, and I appreciate your response to it too, because this is a lot of the things that we talk about that can be frustrating in our field, because there are a lot of really big terms that cover so much. And it's not something we can go take a CEU class over the weekend or a module online, self-study to become competent. And I think my biggest takeaway over the last couple of decades is it gets worse as you get older. The more you know, the worse it gets in some ways. I'm so incompetent. I felt much more competent 20 years ago because I'd just taken the class and I felt like I was, because I'd gotten the stamp, right? Here's your cultural competence. You finished this course. And it doesn't even begin to cover it. And there's many terms like that. So thank you for bringing that up too, because we've got a lot of things in our code of ethics that we give a nod to. We acknowledge they exist, but we don't have the infrastructure or the accountability. So, thank you. Dr. Berghardt?
It's been a great conversation, Isabel. It's really been, I think, inspiring for us all, and I'm sure it will be for our listeners. So one of the things we do, we always want to make sure that the last comment comes from you, whoever our guest speaker is. You've said many, many things, but we also would like you to just have a chance to, whatever you'd like to leave us all with, not just the three of us, but the audience that will hear this, please feel free to say what you like.
So are you talking about my personal path, or kind of where, I'm sorry, did I get it right?
Anything.
Any final message you'd like to give to your audience out there?
Final comment, just be patient, regardless of, different color, regardless of where, you're from, the origin, nationality, the language. As in the end, what we want to get out of this society is social justice, and then racial equality, and the equal opportunity. That really, like, having that kind of concept and making a difference day by day makes a huge difference. So I don't know whether I'm going into the right direction. Some people criticize me. What are you doing? Like, being in the desk and the writing and then reading, cultural competency and culturally and linguistically appropriate services. What are you doing? Like, some criticize me, even, among my friends. And then, but what can I do? This is what I do pretty okay. And then I like to do. And then I want to see someone like me who enjoying their jobs to make difference in their own way. So that's what I would like to see more among the other people.
Thank you so much.
Keep going. Thank you.
Thank you.
For your
Thank
work.
you so much, Professor.
Thank you.